Welcome back, Renee. We were so lucky to hear your story. You have personal story of migration to the United States, growing up in a tight-knit Caribbean community, and also personal story of having a close relative develop a psychotic disorder and needing ongoing care really into his adult life.
Mhm.
So you come from a place where you intimately understand, and also your professional experiences in higher ed enable you to intimately understand some of the struggles that people face when they come into college and how to support them through it.
Mhm.
So let's actually begin there.
Mhm.
What are some of the struggles, unique struggles that you think Caribbean students, maybe even international students face when they come into the US college graduate system for the
Mhm.
first time?
Well, the first thing I am aware of, and partially through the work of my husband Clifford Thornton in college admissions, is that these are students who have achieved at the highest level in a highly competitive context. More often than not, these students are used to high performance and a particular style of instruction and assessment. They get to, especially, um, a liberal arts college in the United States, and the instructional format, as well as the assessments, are often the things that first bring international students in to talk to me as a class dean. That those would be the things they would receive their first D or their first C, or even a failing grade. um, and it would start to show up in tests, as well as even writing research paper. Well trained students able to write well, grammatically sound, however, trained in a way to um, give difference to authority and to be very objective in any assessment of theory or practice. And often students would come in and say, I don't know why I received a poor grade in this when I wrote a good paper. I pointed out all the theories. I gave lots of examples. These are well written, this is a well written essay. Uh, I made all the proper references. And yet, this professor is saying I need to put more of my own opinion in this. I wasn't trained to put my opinion in this. Who am I to put my opinion in this? I'm at university. I don't know.
Mm.
Those kinds of challenges where, moving from an educational system in which you are to master content and present your awareness, your knowledge of that content, versus you are to integrate it and create anew, and you are to critique it heavily. Those types of transitions are are the kinds of experiences that I would start to see a lot in the early days when international students first get to campus. Over the years, the Student Affairs Office started putting in some more, kind of workshops and panels and discussions to kind of, inform the students and also educate the faculty.
Mhm.
There is this transitional piece going on, and to think about the ways in which one's pedagogical practices might be more inclusive. And
Mhm.
that was a part of a broader effort to cultivate a learning style and a teaching style that would allow all students, regardless of their background, to find a way to excel.
This is so
Um,
good because a person can be talented one of the shows that we did was with someone who came from the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
She was straight A's,
Mm-hmm.
a straight A student involved in many different extracurricular activities, and really started performing poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And there was limited curiosity about why she was performing poorly in this new setting. It was just assumed, not looking back and seeing where she was coming from, it was assumed that something was wrong with her ability to, or she had diminished ability to understand a particular subject area.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really good because if you're coming from any kind of homogenous background or setting, homogenous way of thinking, you may not really understand or even begin to conceptualize that you have a whole group of people who think, talk, and operate differently, and it can still be a very good thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, and that's usually in the humanities and the arts, but then, less so in the math and sciences, right? Because it's about the discipline, the content, and for those international students who pursue STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we see it less pronounced there. In fact, what we were seeing was dominance. Partly because of excellent preparation, but there was excellent preparation in the humanities and the arts as well. But because of that other little piece, it would get in the way of demonstrating that skill set. But in the math, science, technology, engineering, et cetera, it really would be noticeable in the other ways that the international students, especially students from the Caribbean and the continent of Africa, often were performing considerably higher than the African American students from the U.S. And so, what does that mean then, though? It means that one then, if you are Black from Trinidad or Black from Jamaica, and you are excelling in the math and sciences, you are probably among the few. There is yet another level of isolation there. So, it becomes a tension between the academic pursuit and the social context in which students are engaging in this enterprise, this educational enterprise. Trying to figure out how one can continue the belief that because one has come from a predominantly Black country or nation and is now in the US, and race is so pronounced in the US, and it didn't feel, whether it's real or not, we'll put it aside, but didn't feel as pronounced on your island or in your environment, that now you're being forced to be Black in a way that one did not have to feel in their particular schooling setting in their home nation. That becomes a part of it. That starts to play out for some of our international students coming to study in the US. I mean, a good example, although not dealing with international students and migration, was what was happening in the recent, not Yugoslavia, where we have the war, Ukraine. And the African students. And African students were saying, we went to study in Ukraine because it was open doors, excellent teaching, affordable. We had friends. And all of a sudden, when war broke out, we were Black and we were less than. And that was a harsh reality to reconcile with their experience as having been a part of, whether it be economics community or the engineering community or whatever it is that they were pursuing. So race is another piece that plays out for our international students coming to the US. And trying to find community in ways that stretch but also protect.
Where does mental health issues fit into all of this?
Central, especially if one has come from either a personal situation, combination of, social class and resources and so on, and culture that says we don't spend any time talking about mental health. You need to rest, or you need to pray. This is what some of my students would tell me, from the continent, when they would be going through struggles. And I'm a woman of faith, and I appreciate that. And I also think it's far more complex than that. One cannot pray away the distractions that comes if one has, a psychotic condition and needs to be regulated and worked with over time. You can feel an escape, and in fact, that becomes a part of it, but it's far more complex than that. So, it also becomes very complicated with the family piece. You're miles and miles, hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away from family, and a lot has been invested for you to be where you are. Maybe not always dollars and cents, because people are different levels of resources. There are some international students who are coming here and their parents are paying the full bill, or their country is paying the full bill. And there are others who have been distinguished and have had the good fortune of winning and earning scholarships. And there's a lot at stake.
There is a lot at stake.
And that is an additional burden. That is an additional piece that is always present. And for instance, if I tell you, baby, don't worry about it, go take a year off, go relax.
That's not an option. That was never an option in my mind.
Never an option. But the idea is, one can be at a state where you're just oversaturated. There's just too much going on. Something's got to give. And if one tries to keep up all the pieces at once, the thing that gives sometimes is the health. And, the other piece that I would end up dealing with is efforts to self-medicate. Students would try to make little efforts to relieve some of the stress, and sometimes it would work out and sometimes it would not work out for them. But mental health is central, because fear of letting the family know, fear of letting the family down, not having those resources already in place, so that when one is starting to experience these things, one can go to those resources, not having the vocabulary and the framework to understand that what is happening is actually just a part of human variation. Some people, for whatever reasons, I leave that to the psychiatrist, will have manifestations of these different learning and thinking abilities. And we don't all understand it, but if you need to function in a particular setting, that often one needs some assistance in order to pursue those goals. And there's nothing wrong with that. So getting in the way of the myths, the misunderstanding, the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge and education about the existence of neurodiversity in the human population. I think that that's the big piece. If that could be more normalized and therefore taught, so that people can know that it's not planting a seed. It's like when they talk about sexual activity, If you teach sex ed, that does not mean you're telling them to go engage in sexual activity. You're given the tools, you're given the framework, you're given the information. And should one encounter certain things, they say, oh, I know what that feels like. I know what that means. I know what that might, one can be prepared. And that even if it's not for the self, that one can see it in someone else and might be of a resource. So I think that is the biggest challenge. But then the other challenge is some of the other hidden aspects of people.
I do want to come back on I do want to kind of backtrack a little bit, because one of the things you said about being international is really important. A person is moving from their country of origin to this new place. It's a new kind of system, new health system, probably very few connections unless they have family in the area. When something happens, if a decision needs to be made about support, it may involve a person flying in from out of the country. It may involve considering a leave of absence. And it becomes very, very complicated if, especially if there are not already supports in place at the institution, or the person is aware of what's going on with them, or the person doesn't want to seek help. So it's a big deal. And then, one of the things that you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation is this idea of self-advocacy being perceived to be different in different places. So even what I have encountered is, even when if a parent may fly in and want to support their child, they may not advocate with the same level of force as a US-born person from a particular socioeconomic or status or racial background may advocate for themselves.
Absolutely. I really want to narrow in on this piece about the whole, parental support piece and parental involvement piece, and it being very class-based and resource-based. And also bring in the awareness that many of my students who are international would have, that they did not want to expose too much of these challenges for fear that it would be discovered that they need some time. They need to take a medical leave. Because a medical leave, if you really are in distress, can become mandatory. So it's not always an option. Students don't always have the option of saying, I think I'd like to request a medical leave. If one is in enough psychiatric and psychological crises and behavior, it doesn't have to be an academic related thing, but if the person is behaving in such concerning ways, the institution can say, the term we use is we're recommending a medical leave, but it's not really a recommendation. We're putting you on a medical leave. Mm-hmm. And a medical leave means that you have to be away from the institution for at least a year. And during that time, you have to engage in treatment towards the condition that became, of concern while you were at the institution. And in order to return to the college or university, one needs to have written consent from that therapist that is endorsing, that's recommending that you are well enough. You have the resources, you're well enough to be back in a residential college setting. Now, if you are a person of resource, you can make all of that happen. If you're someone, like I would have students whose financial situation is not that stable. So you go on a medical leave and you're home. Home might be abroad. Home might be back in Brooklyn. And if you don't have the resources and the network to engage in psychological therapy with a therapist who can get to know you well enough that when come time for you to apply to return from medical leave, that person can endorse it and you write your letter and all your finances are lined up, because remember, if you go on a medical leave mid-semester, that tuition is still there. That has to be taken care of. And if you're an international student on financial aid or on grant and scholarship, that is one semester's worth of courses that you won't have. You're going to have to negotiate something with financial aid to get like another semester on, because that semester has already been paid for. So there's a lot of pieces. And when my students started to, sometimes they would get into the piece of, okay, well, I could really, I really need some time away, but can you help me make it through this? Because the alternative is not good. If I go on a medical leave, I don't know that I can afford a year of therapy. I don't know that I can have somebody write to endorse my return. I don't know how we're going to make up for that tuition. So that makes stress even more stressful.
I feel stressed just listening to you.
It is hard. And so when mental health challenges present themselves, and I'm talking an extreme case, right? I'm not talking about one who is experiencing mild forms of stress and despair. I'm talking about because you asked me to talk about mental health piece, and I start to think about like the whole spectrum of it. When one starts to experience real significant mental health distress, the prospect of losing it all makes it so unbearable that it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. I've had to work with some students through those. Sometimes, more times than not, we've been able to work out something, a whole bunch of extensions and incompletes, and you just make it work and you stretch it out and you try to get them connected with services and you meet with them every week and you make sure they're going to therapy. And you get them through to that other side, they're on their medicine and so on, and you thank the heavens above. But sometimes the isolation that one puts themselves in when they're in despair means that people in my field, in my position, may not be aware that a student is in crisis until it is too late. And again, when it's people in the US, there are resources. The families might be closer. If they don't have family, they might have friends. But the proximity matters. International, not so easy. So I say that when it comes to international students coming to study in the US, or even studying within their own island or their own nation, there are compounding factors that they have to deal with that makes the journey that much harder. But they are real, and we do a disservice by not preparing people for that possibility. Hope they never need to use it.
Thank you for sharing that. Next time, let's talk about how to prepare people for this possibility and how to maximize use of services that exist if they do exist. Thanks so much for sharing your insight and knowledge, and we'll talk to you soon.